Excellent. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Wednesday afternoon weekly webinar here as people are still perhaps working from home or maybe shifting gears and getting back to the office, getting out of the monotony of being in their home office for the last little while. Today's topic, we'll dig a bit deeper here on just the concept of data as a service. What does that mean? I think it's not exactly a straightforward topic by any stretch of the imagination, and lots of people have some different thoughts and ideas of just what that means. So thanks for joining us here, and as always, your feedback is appreciated. If someone could just give me a quick confirmation that my slides are moving, that's always good. Agenda here for this afternoon, just at a really high level, what we're going to cover off here, and I think basically the impetus for the reason behind doing this topic this week was we're just hearing a lot from people and trying to work towards more of a self-service data culture as a whole. So just we'll kind of conceptually talk through what is data as a service. How can you start to think more like become more of a data-driven organization and think that way? The importance of it, what you can gain from doing so, and really how to get started in some of the technical pieces of that. So always like to somewhat start these with a bit of a state of the union in terms of what's going on out there and why. Based on some various industry sources here, I think primarily some of these were drawn from Forbes, but basically 80% of people are of that. My eyes kind of go to that stat on the left-hand side there. 80% of executives fear losing their competitive advantage and risking that extinction. So I think that's not really necessarily new to us. I kind of wonder who the 20% are that feel that they're insulated and don't need to evolve and become data-driven in how they do their business. But in any event, just for further ponderance and thoughts for everyone, take a look at some of those figures and see what you think. This graphic here kind of helps me articulate if someone asked me just off the street of like, hey, well, what is data as a service, and how can we start to embed that in our organization, and where do we start with this? Looking at this and truthfully kind of looking at this through the lens of somebody that's focused on a business applications based business and how we work with companies and getting them set up on their ERP to ERP and CRM platforms. So really helping them engage their customers, optimize what their operations look like, empower their employees, and then transform products. I think empowering the employees, transforming products, people don't necessarily always understand what that looks like. I know often the conversations around developing a customer portal, doing more around marketing automation, mining a bunch of customer web data so that we can come up with more targeted and relevant and contextually specific offers and programs for some of our customers or members. That all kind of makes sense, and people certainly have no shortage of ways that they can envision optimizing and improving process efficiency, but transforming products or transforming services would be that one where I think it's kind of maybe more conceptually challenging than people realize. And one good way I think to start to do that is put things out as a self-service data, really let data drive decision making in the organization. So let that drive the strategy. And just from another thought here, again, this is somewhat of a Microsoft-oriented piece of content, but really we're starting to see the Microsoft Dynamics specifically shift into to leveraging these AI-driven customer insights platforms that are really driven by a lot of data inputs and predictive analytics. So very much driven on a lot of the core underlying data. And if you're reading specifically into the Microsoft stuff, I know we're trying not to make this content Microsoft specific, but Microsoft's open data initiative that they have in terms of working publicly, getting on stage at their respective conferences with Adobe and SAP, and having an open data initiative, and I'm sure you've probably read a bunch of things around the common data common data platform and what Microsoft is doing on the common data services side. Not that we're going to get too much into that, but it's really that kind of serves as being a core foundational piece or an enabler to building your data warehousing and some of your data as a service systems. I wanted to just pop this up here just for more everyone's common understanding. So we're kind of speaking from a unified baseline, and just in terms of understandings around machine learning, AI, deep learning. I think I've found kind of a good graphic if anybody wants to chat later that kind of displays the three of those and how they sequentially build upon each other. But just more than anything, referentially for people here, so that we're all kind of speaking the same language. And if you want to read further into any of those pieces, by all means, please do. So, what is data as a service, and why is this an important topic, and where do we start to think about this? I kind of look at it, or just based on conversations we've had with people, we're more at the structured database layer, trying to get people empowered with more data-driven cultures in their organization. And I'll use an example, actually a company that friends of mine, personal friends of mine, he's been working with this organization where basically their original mission and purpose for being was to actually install satellites in outer space, and as part of the Canadian Space Agency, they were implementing these satellites, and they realized once they were basically done the project that they were commissioned for, that they were collecting all sorts of relevant nautical information that could be used in shipping and logistics and freight scenarios, particularly around open waters and in shipping channels and shipping canal situations. So that's just, I'll say, one example of where data can be utilized and then potentially repurposed, and to kind of go back to what I was showing earlier around the digital feedback loop concept of taking data and then repurposing it into new products and potentially new services. That's one example, but I think more than anything, commonly we'll hear from people in either on the business side from a finance point of view, or from a marketing point of view, or perhaps from that, I'll say, more self-aware IT leader. And we really need to just to empower people to self-serve with information, and we in IT need to be stewards of information and just let people have good access to sanitized and hygienic data, so that they can take it and do what they do as business people and really drive us forward, and not being a bottleneck. So I think that's just kind of the main concept here that you want to think about, and how do you do that appropriately with the appropriate parameters. You see the word governance there, and we'll kind of drill a layer down further on that. Stewardship was a word I used previously, but I think certainly where we're seeing lots of these scenarios come into play, or when and where data governance is required in developing policies, a lot of times driven out of a merger or acquisition, where there's two sets of records that need to be integrated into one. What becomes the system, the single source of truth? What's the record of the master record, and how do you then start to do master data management? I put there just a little bit of information, and I do have some further, if anybody's interested, I'll shoot it your way, some further reading, a fairly good post and some content around master data management, what it is, what it isn't. But primarily one thing it's not is transactional level data. So there's a good definition there of what it is, if you are interested. So building blocks, how to start with a data as a service from a technical point of view. How do you think about it in phases? And the whole sounds a little cliche, but Rome wasn't built in a day, but they were laying bricks every hour. So what are the building blocks, and how do you start with connecting your data sources in one spot, How do you then start to unify things and put some governance practices in place? What are your policies and procedures around metadata management, retention of records, the MDM policies and procedures? And then from there, once you have some of that set up in place, I think you can really start to cook with gas, so to speak, and move into more of that predictive realm of AI and ML. But foundationally, I think some of those pieces are pretty important. Just want to give a bit of a visual here, and I think we personally, our business is focused very much in that application, those application sides of the business or file systems. But we're always people are approaching us and saying, well, how can we expose dashboards out more easily and with more accurate data and more timely fashion to people within our organization. So just wanted to kind of pop up here what we think some of the technical componentry looks like here, and a lot of that time it's comprised from databases. And I think one of those common challenges certainly would be how do you link multiple databases or multiple data sources into one. Looking at a data warehouse as a strategy, or using the data lake concepts here, and there's more content you can read about, whether that's Microsoft related. I know there's a number of services out there. Tibco is another software provider where we work with a lot of their products, and see some really good services from what they're doing around driving data as a service, or enabling businesses would be a better way to say it, to drive data as a service. So take a look at a few of those pieces, but really the concept being using a data as a service platform to empower people at that top layer to go and create their own information and data from governed data that you've surfaced up to them in that data platform layer, if that makes sense. Next, just kind of switching over here, give you a bit of an expanded view of basically that same previous slide. But along the top here, you primarily think of it from a user's point of view, where you have whether that's people internally working on a web browser or behind a desk type of scenario. I think more so a lot of the things that, if we've been paying attention to any of the webinars we've been doing, particularly working with Cosmos Forms, or creating a more rich and enhanced mobile app experience where people can consume data on their own out in the field. There's no shortage of field work scenarios there. Or how do you start to surface things up to even external people, right? So how do you look at a portal scenario where I'm an external user to your organization, but I authenticate in, and then information tailored to me or tailored to the work we're doing between our two organizations is pushed out to me there. So why is this important? I think we've kind of already talked about this conceptually. It just ways to, I'll say, facilitate that cross silo data integration. You can start to look at ingestion scenarios from other services. I know didn't even really talk about it yet, but I know there's, for example, if anybody's looked at or worked with companies like Dun & Bradstreet, for example, either on the front end of their sales and marketing data, there's certainly data ingestion tools there, or from more of a finance and operations point of view, there's ingestion services where you can optimize, enrich and optimize your data platform there. So some things you can kind of quickly look at. But really the ability to come up, and I've said it, starting to sound like a broken record, I feel like, but allowing people to self-serve. And I would say not even internally here, but also externally, using that data for letting your customers self-serve. If you saw that stat, I kind of clicked through it quickly, but data-driven companies are 23% more likely to acquire customers. So it's people just want to self-serve. A few more ideas here. Nothing we haven't already talked about. Again, nothing we haven't really talked about here around data virtualization, metadata management. So cataloging and developing the right taxonomy and information tagging structure for, I think really what that means just to translate is searchability. Can I find what I'm looking for? And the MDM side around data, master data management. What I did find once it was tagged and cataloged properly and I found it, is it valid? So a few of those pieces just to think about there. So just to kind of further build those pieces out, I'll let you kind of consume this. I don't want to speak to this too much, but certainly, actually, this was a slide that was provided by our friends at Tibco and how they're kind of breaking down their vision for data management into that first step of connecting everything and unifying the data, and then moving on to the next layer of predicting. I think it's actually kind of interesting just as you think and get down to this layer here around compliance. The other thing we haven't even really touched on yet, but in terms of what your retention policies and information ought to look like. Again, just kind of some thoughts here. Depending on the nature of the information, whether that's personally identifiable info or there considerations you need to take there. And by retaining that, determining who has access to that, what risks or liabilities are you potentially maybe opening yourself up to? If you want to go pull up these folks here, the Viola Environmental Services, they're an interesting little case study here. They've made use and basically moved from kind of that Excel world where they're doing a lot of custom development in terms of their reporting, whether that's using SQL SSRS reporting services and or Excel as a combination, kind of I'll say the data strategy of maybe the early 2000s or mid 2000s. And now really making use of Power BI and some of the Azure data services that are out there. So where do all these pieces start to come together? And I mentioned this earlier. I'm just looking for my cursor. Thinking from kind of a top layer idea here from a user side, but as you kind of drill down further, looking at these kind of three core pieces here of data virtualization, metadata management, and master data management that we've talked about a few points already. And then just underneath, really, what are your data ingestion services and how do you get that information in? So a little more technical in nature, but if that's of interest to anyone, that's something to think about and just kind of stew on that slide. So at this point, I think actually we maybe had a Q&A slide. We'll kind of stop here, and if there are any questions, feel free to hammer them in the chat. I know this was a bit of a one-sided conversation. We were hoping to have someone else join us here with some interesting firsthand accounts of working in some scenarios where they've created a data warehouse and swapped some war stories, but unfortunately schedules didn't permit. Okay. One question that's popped in here. We're a relatively small business. Do we really need to hire a data scientist? I don't know. I wouldn't profess to be a data scientist by any stretch of the imagination myself. So I can't weigh in on this from the merits and pros or cons of a data scientist, but certainly I think there are some very effective ways to get started with doing things, and I know everybody's kind of at various points on their journey, I'll say, but if in terms of graduating, if you will, out of the Excel world and really just, I would say, even as a starting point, getting started with something simple around a Power BI, there's no shortage of industry focused content packs where you can kind of use that as a learning point to figure out what it is you may want to do, and by no means would a data scientist be something you'd want to jump right into, but depending on the nature of your business, where you are, all those other variables, perhaps it's something you grow into. But if you're looking at it from a pure I'll say greenfield point of view with no previous exposure, but you're just trying to figure out where to get started, I would suggest that might be a good spot to start to read a little bit more, and then you can kind of figure out where your next steps may be. Another question here. Do you have any suggestions on methods or tools that are effective to communicate and share your information out? Well, I know the whole concept here that we've been belaboring here as a point is self-service. So in terms of leveraging your existing communications, it really depends on how you do things today and what some of the cultural norms are. The effective pieces we've found, at least personally, within kind of the Microsoft realm to communicate things out. Real simple things, actually, you might see here on the screen, the whole Power Apps and Power Automate. Just a real simple scenario that you might want to think about is just even pushing visuals or links to information around using Power Automate. Just so an example that you can kind of contextualize, even just a weekly update for a dashboard that's pushed out to people via Teams. We use the Power Automate agent, for example, and every Friday morning at 8:30, I get a notification from the Power Automate bot in my Teams that says, hey, click here and here's your weekly update of the information you want to see or need to see based on your role. And of course, you can start to tailor that, become more efficient, and zero that in over time, but just a simple example to get started with. How do I avoid GDPR implications with data? Great question, and it's a multifaceted answer, I'm sure. And by no means is this to be construed as legal advice from anybody that would be, more suited to answer that in a legal context. But in terms of just best practices, in terms of ensuring you have the appropriate access to the appropriate information, from building some of that into your security model with people. So, defining your role. I will say, think about your role-based security within your organization. So, what information are you collecting about people, and what do some of your externally, what are your comms or information look like? But internally, who has access to what is one good thing to make sure you're compliant in terms of GDPR. And realistically, I think kind of if you wanted to look at it from a master data management point of view, if you had everything all in one spot in terms of, or I'll say a well-defined and well thought out master data management strategy, if someone were to come to you and say, hey, under the context of GDPR, I want you to produce everything you have on me, it becomes a bit of a more straightforward exercise, as opposed to having things a little bit scattered or in multiple different places with multiple different people having multiple different accesses. So I'll say on the surface, without qualifying that further, kind of a two-part answer. One part, what are your access points internally here in terms of who has access to the information, and part two, do you have everything in one consolidated source, data source, so that you can actually get your arms around it. Anything else? No, I don't think we have anything else. Well, with that said, a few other options here, just some information to check out if you haven't done so already. This in particular here, I would say the Microsoft Business Application Summit last month provided a wealth of good information, and perhaps some interesting things there. If you do have some specific questions that you want to talk to anyone at the TIBCO side, I know there was a little bit of TIBCO content throughout this. Feel free to let us know, and we can get you in touch with some of their services or some of their folks. The next week, we'll be doing a little bit of a deeper dive here on the CRM side, and just taking a look at why CRM is a powerful platform, and where you can start to use that more effectively across the rest of your organization, perhaps maybe just beyond your sales department. So with that said, thanks everyone for joining again on on our Wednesday afternoon work from home webinars. Hope you found them insightful and enjoyable. If you have any direct feedback, feel free to let us know. We're always happy to hear you. And thanks again for joining us. Have a good rest of your day.